Hello and welcome to today's webinar. E-commerce, the core of experimentation, is your customer. I'm Jen Decker and I'll be your host today. Before we get started, I want to mention that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So please make sure to subscribe. In addition, if there is time permitting, we will allow for some questions for MaryBeth. So feel free to type those into your question panel and we'll try to get to those at the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter from Insight Lime Analytics, founder and principal analytics and optimization consultant, MaryBeth Maskovas. Welcome, MaryBeth.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to share this with SiteSpect. And I'll give a little bit more of an intro about me before we get started. So just let me get all settled. No, that's not what I want. Give me a second. All right, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Like Jen said, my name is MaryBeth. I run a consulting firm and we specialize in analytics and very much focused on driving impact with whatever analysis that we're doing. So that means that we're a little broad. We do focus on consumer insights and then also traditional digital analytics and A/B testing programs. I'm not going to sit here and read through all of my credentials. I'll let you take a peek yourself and decide, whether I'm worth listening to, which hopefully you think so if you're here with me today. Perfect. So like I said, there'll be time for comments at the end. Jen, if they really start piling up, just let me know and I can pause and we can go into some. So this is going to sound a little basic, but how would you define testing? You can put your answers in the chat now. This is something that we don't, we kind of take for granted when we're working with things like testing tools. So you might see that there'd be several different kind of definitions of testing in the chat, or if you ask different people in your organization. And I see this a lot when someone says, we need to test more. I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean? And the most common, variant that everyone here is familiar with is the A/B testing on digital variant at the bottom here, which is creating variants of features and partitioning the traffic and seeing if there's impact on key metrics. But, the advertiser definition is another one that's quite similar. And when you talk about testing programs, sometimes this is rolled into a testing program. So you have like one center of excellence and sometimes it's not. And I have actually been in a conversation where the context got confused and someone was talking about QA instead. So just a fun little intro there that for us, we're kind of talking about this bottom one and why we test. There's probably a lot of different answers, again, if I asked everyone in this room. But I'm going to say something a little bit different, which is the focus of this webinar, which is that we test because we want to improve the customer experience, period. Don't let a growth hacker tell you anything different. There's a lot of people that sometimes get lost about, well, we're looking to drive just conversion rate. We want to drive more revenue, and that's true. But the way that you do that is by improving your customer's experience, whether it's improving that checkout flow, offering better options for shipping, making it easier to use your website in general. Discounts are something that I know is very loaded, and there's probably fights at every single one of your organizations about whether you should do it or not. When a discount does work, it's really helping push that consumer over the edge to purchase. It's less about tricking them into purchasing. So all of these things are really the core of an excellent testing program that drives impact. And so we're going through all of these basics because it's a framework for where we're going to start to get into these other pragmatic pieces. I'm hoping that pretty much any of these slides, you could take some of these elements and apply them to your existing program and make some improvements. So if you currently don't have test evaluation criteria, and you're not checking all of these boxes when you're pushing tests through, doing a few of these checks beforehand can have a lot more impact on the tests that you run. Have tests that are more often showing an impact, whether that's positive or negative. And I'll mention a little bit of how improving customer experience and testing some of these features isn't just about always winning. It's also about making sure that you don't put something into production that your customer isn't going to like. So you can test it out, do a prototype first, and find out before you put all of the investment into that. But going back to good tests, they're based on data, whether it's your customer behavioral data, surveys, or market intelligence information. They also should be measurable, have high volume in the area that you're testing, whatever part of the site that is. They should be high impact in how you estimate that they're going to impact your customer experience. And they're going to balance that impact with work required. And I'll show a matrix at the end of this deck, but really you're going to have to be careful because sometimes there would be something that you'll evaluate as being a huge impact. You can drive a lot of revenue with it, but if it's going to take 6 months to develop, you want to be careful with those. And while there's definitely a place for creative tests or ideas that are not based in data, I would say at least 70% should be coming from opportunities you identify in data, probably more. This is where the usage of data is broad. So even a brand team can come with data and say, hey, based on market intelligence or based on what I know about personas, I think we should test this. That's based in data. So just looking at your current test pipeline, think about what percentage you currently have that are coming from that. How many tests do you have in your pipeline where you can have a reference and however you are making that ticketing system or anything to see, okay, this is the data that's backing up that this is something we should test. Great. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, which is to show a little peek into how the analysts at our firm and how other investigative analysts are going to go about getting data for this type of test. So like, how are we looking at your analytics data, regardless to what platform you use? How are we going about finding places that are big opportunities and finding places and information that you can send out across the org to make differences? And this is a methodology that we use beyond also just testing programs on the day-to-day. This is how we identify any issues. I like to call it the data watchdog system also, where if there's something that happens, an outage, a marketing campaign not being tagged properly, we like to be able to catch that first and be able to send that information to the respective team. This is pretty simplified, but the starting points of how we do this is based on domain knowledge and benchmarks and anomalies in the data. So we're always looking for change based on what we know to be true. So we check for those movements, especially in the key KPIs of your business. So if there's certain metrics that are the most important, those are the ones we're going to start with. And we're going to look at those changes. And this is something that if you're an analyst on this call, you can easily apply this kind of methodology. I'm going to use some dummy data, which has some limitations, but I'll explain the thought process behind there. But what we'll see is something like, oh, hey, month over month, conversion rate is up or down. What's the cause of that? Is that something that we can improve on if it's gone down? Is there something that is an action item out of that? So for a traffic and marketing case, maybe it's that the conversion rate has gone down when we look at the traffic mix and some things have been changed by the marketing team. Then we can report those findings to the marketing team, discuss how we improve. On the other side of the house that we're going to focus on today is user experience, which is there something that we can see that we can identify as a pain point in the data? If we see that ever since we added a new feature, or maybe just historically, we see that in the checkout funnel, there's a certain pain point, which is a really common issue, which I would recommend looking into regardless. There may be a certain part in your checkout funnel. So once someone has already added to cart, or also just the whole purchase journey where you have a leakier bucket than you would expect. And you can take a look at that and dive even deeper with an analytics team to see can we understand some of the context behind this? Can we get some theories about what we could change to make this better? So I'm going to show you a super brief example using Google Analytics dummy data. So keep in mind, this is the data might look a little funny. And this same process can be done in Adobe Analytics. I'm using Google Analytics because they have a lot more demo data available. All right, so to start off this example, I'm going to go back to the conversion rate part because this is a lot easier to show. And I'm going to go through the logic of what I would see as an analyst and how I would communicate this to a team. And this will, I promise, relate back to how to design tests based around this. So all of you are probably familiar with Google Analytics and have seen the data. And if you're more of a senior person and you're not into the data, that's okay. You can still take this same like recording or idea to your analytics team if they're not currently surfacing analysis this way. So like I said, there's a few different ways to compare and understand movements. One of my favorite is time period comparisons. I like to do longer rather than shorter, but it depends on how much data you have. I'm pretending that this demo account is much higher volume than it is. So if you see some things here where you're like, well, that's not a very big difference, just pretend that it's a much bigger data set than it is. So in this case, really clearly, I'm going to look at, so for Google, I'm going to think in their merchandise store, which is the demo account, I'm going to think that revenue and conversion rate and also like the volume of transactions are some of their key performance indicators that they've told me as the analyst. And what I can see right away is that there is a somewhat significant increase in revenue over these two time periods. And looking at the context of the other metrics, I can see that average order value has gone up, transactions have stayed relatively the same, and the conversion rate has gone down. So going back to that logic, those are all of the high level metrics, but they influence each other as well. So I know that the average order value and revenue and conversion rate are all playing together. So if average order value goes up, but conversion rate goes down, you can actually have an increase in revenue. And this one is really simple, an insight that's on this page already. So I don't actually have to go into any other reports to do this, but what I can see is that there's a significant drop in coupon code orders and internal promotions. So I can assume and go and verify with the marketing or the promotions team that in like earlier in this year, they were doing a lot more promotions and then they stopped. So what does this mean for testing or for optimization? It means that I can go to the team and show these numbers and say, hey, so when we stopped doing promotions, the conversion rate actually went down, but the average order value went up by almost $30 an order on average. We got this much revenue. What were we doing with coupons before? Do we want to do that again? And what I would do further than this one, which is a little bit more difficult in the universal analytics interface without building custom reports or pulling the data some other ways, would be to analyze the behaviors of those customers a little bit more in detail and also look at those coupons and say, was this worth it? What if next time we test segmenting traffic and only offering coupons to customers that we think would otherwise not purchase? So there's a test idea right there. Or maybe we look a little deeper and we say, oh, actually, there was certain coupons that we think were added by someone at the very end of the cart and it wasn't a motivator to purchase. What if we just don't offer that at all? Or what if we do a test where we offer it not just to specific behavioral segments, but just not and yes, and see like, okay, do we drive more revenue? Like, is it, and then that's a really easy justification in the future to say, we are a coupon business, we aren't a coupon business, we are a coupon business, but only for specific segments, and get a lot more targeted and also begin running personalizations that cater to those different markets. Perfect. And I'm just going to dive into one other thing and talk a little bit about checkout behavior. The demo data isn't as exciting, but let's say that in these steps, there is one that has a significant drop off that I wouldn't expect as an analyst. And this is where context comes in. There are certain steps that do have typically have more drop off than others. So I'm also looking at it through that lens of that matrix that or that flow chart that I just showed of, is this actually something that's worth looking into or not? Can I influence it? But say there was something there, what I might do is if at payment drop off, there was some issues, I'm going to look at that segment and check. The first thing that I usually check with this is, of the people who dropped off and got to this step compared to those who made it to a purchase or compared to the getting to the following step, was there something about their experience that didn't align with what we hoped for? So one example is sometimes I've seen that the site speed is much slower for those customers. That's sometimes one cause. So there may be something like in the payment step or that billing and shipping step, there's a delay that's causing some actual technical issues. And that's an easy fix that doesn't need to be tested. But then there's also things like customers thinking that they can click on things that they can't, wanting different payment options. Now, some of those are a little trickier to find with Google Analytics, which is what we're going to go to next. So this is what I said by next. There's a lot of ways to add context to what you consider traditional analytics data. And if your analytics team currently doesn't have some of these tools, it's really great to consider them, because while it gives you some of the behavioral indicators, it doesn't give the on-page context as well. And this is the same for Adobe Analytics. I know that some of you use Adobe instead of Google. It's the same thing where sometimes it's nice to have some additional context about what's truly happening, and get you a little closer to that why, so you have a theory about what you should test. And there's 3 core ways that I recommend doing this. The first one is to use in-product and post-purchase surveys to understand context. So blending your consumer insights team with your analytics team and really leveraging that data to get ideas. So if you currently aren't looking at those feedback surveys that you currently have, whether depending on what industry you're in, you might have NPS or something like that, and looking at what the comments are and seeing if there's anything that applies to your digital products that you could test. That's definitely somewhere to go. And then also implementing even more context surveys where you can get information. And this is a way where even if you see something in the data like that drop off at payment, you can even trigger a survey at that time and be able to ask the question that you're asking your analytics team directly to the customer, which is, what's going on here that's frustrating you? Another one is to talk to customer support, customer service. Some companies have this more separated than others. Most of the time, customer service is reserved for your product itself if you have a physical product, but I guarantee you that those customer service people also get calls or get requests to the support line that are based on the digital e-commerce product as well. And so they may have some really interesting insights that you can't see in the data about places where the website doesn't work well, or products that are out of stock that are really frustrating to customers, and like what the customers are saying about that. And then finally, using heat mapping and user recording tools is one of the ways to take that final step of the analyst's analysis, because they can see on the heat map or on a user recording segmenting those customers that dropped off on that payment step, and be able to understand or even show what exactly was happening with some of those cases. So I'm going to dive into those a little bit more in detail. So the customer surveys, like I said, Consumer Insights, you probably are running some surveys already, but there's some additional things that you can consider, which is implementing these surveys that are 1 question or 2 questions that are on a specific point that you have questions about. So you can really understand your customers in detail right in the moment that they are going to be experiencing your e-commerce product. That's very useful on top of the hard behavioral data that you see within Google Analytics, which is showing you what happened. So, okay, that people bounce from this page, but you don't know the why so much. So super helpful. There's a lot of different tools to make this happen. This obviously has an example with the brand here. There's a lot of other ones as well. And some tips for that is like, if possible, and if you have enough traffic, actually open-ended is better, because then you're not like limiting what they're going to say, and you have a lot of opportunity to hear exactly what they're going to talk about. And sometimes it's not exactly what you're expecting, where if you have a closed question, sometimes you'll miss some of that. And then also, one thing that a lot of these tools have that is another way to layer this on top, especially if there's a critical part where you have issues in your flow, is to have the option for them to speak to somebody beyond answering the survey, especially if they gave an answer that was negative. And then I talked a bit about the customer support part already. There's some pretty easy, you can take this right now and do this as a project. Just talk to your customer support team. It can be really interesting to just have that conversation if you never have before. Have them in the room and, let the analytics team ask questions like, what are the most common website related questions that you get? Are there some things that are difficult for you to solve because it's not related to the product? And also ask about what kind of data there is available. Most customer support teams do have their own way of processing that information, categorizing issues. So there might be information there that an analytics team could analyze and get some higher level insights that can drive tests. And this will be obviously on the recording, so if I'm going too fast, or feel free to screenshot this slide if you want. You can take this further and conduct further interviews with your customer support team. You can prioritize with them. And this is also a way to involve additional teams in the testing process, which the more people that you can get excited about testing in your company, the better the program's going to do. The more ideas that you're going to have that are timely and related to issues that your teams are passionate about. And then heat mapping and user recordings. I really do think that testing programs and testing tools and heat mapping go hand in hand with tools like SiteSpect. There's a lot of possibility to integrate the two and be able to do a lot of interesting things, like see on-page context of tests and really be able to understand that like final layer beyond just whether a test won or lost. And also from the other side of it, when we're looking for opportunities to test, at times I almost think it's even more useful than the metrics that you get from a web analytics tool, because you can really see the behaviors and flows across the page and where it's not working and where it's really working. You'll see that there might be something where you're assuming that they're using a menu element and they're not, or that they're going to click on a certain call to action if you have multiples and they're actually clicking on another one. So really common things to look for are a lot of times customers will click on non-clickable elements, and that even can be a point of frustration. So sometimes that's worth actioning, sometimes it's not. It really depends on where it is and how many issues you're having with that page. But if it's something where it's a huge amount of traffic doing that, and that traffic then has a lower likelihood of converting, it's something worth looking into. Like, what does a customer expect to happen when they click on this? Is a great question to always ask whenever you see a behavior that you're a little surprised about. There's different names for this, but another thing is when there's a frustration point and a customer clicks repeatedly or goes back and forth between pages. This can indicate a lot of different things, but you can sometimes see within the context of that user recording, whether it's something like a load time issue or it's a user experience that's confusing, and that can be really helpful. Also, there's been some times where I've found a bug in a website or something that's like flat out wrong just by looking at the user recordings and the heat mapping that, we probably would have caught eventually, but it's so much faster to catch it when you can see that in that context. The other one that's also one of my favorite things about heat mapping tools is that you can see a lot more clearly and in a visual way how customers are navigating through your site, which is one of the key things about e-commerce sites, is how are you going to get those customers that land on the home page or on a landing page to your category pages, to your product pages, to a purchase. what is the journey that they need to take? And then also, what are the journeys that they're taking that you weren't really intending? Because I guarantee you, not very many people are going directly through that funnel that I just listed. Super common that customers bounce back and forth between category pages and product pages. It's super common that they'll bounce back and forth from category to category page. And also, it's super common that if you start to segment out that data and look at it, there's certain behaviors that are more likely to convert than others. So the question is there a way for us to take those behaviors that aren't as likely to convert and either understand what their intention is? So maybe it is, especially if you're a luxury product or something like that, there may be multiple visits, multiple. I've seen some that are upwards of 20 plus repeat times coming to a site before a purchase is made on average. And so you need to nurture those other parts of that journey as well. So like, are they getting the information they need? And if you can find that out and say, yeah, they're getting what they need, there's nothing we need to change. Or it might be like, is there something even better that I can give a customer when they're on that middle consideration phase on the site? Is there a way that I can organize my site specifically for that segment to make sure that they're going to purchase in the future? And then this is the part that everybody is always waiting for. I really don't like the term best practice tests, and I'm going to talk about why I think it's so loaded. And this is why I say or changes you can make now also to improve your customer experience. The reason I say that is because if anybody tells you that there is a test that is a given and you should absolutely run it and it's going to absolutely have an impact on your site, they're full of crap. It's not that easy. And I've seen things that are considered absolute best practices, industry standards, be tested and lose on sites or lose significantly, like to the point that if we implemented that, it would hurt the main KPIs of the business. And the reason is that like all the customers to your specific companies are so specific, and how they experience your site and what's going to work for them are so specific. So that I just like to preface with that like the reason that I'm showing you these tests is because it's about the customer experience and more about that feel of what needs to be there to serve the customer. And there's some things that we do sometimes where we're well-intentioned, but sometimes we get a little led astray by a motivation like something like, oh, we really have to hit this number, or we really want people to convert. And so we'll get driven into something like, oh, we're really going to be aggressive with the way we use this pop-up or the way we're going to use this coupon. And not saying that any of those things by themselves are bad, but they can very much lead us astray to what is truly a good customer experience. If you think about some things like news sites, for better or worse, they have found a model that gives them revenue now in this digital world. But is the customer experience good when you go to one of those sites? And there's so many ads and things that start playing and everything. And so always going back to the core of what really would delight your customer is what I'm focusing on and what these tests mean. Yeah, and I kind of did my rant before switching the slide. But I'm going to show you some examples. I'm not affiliated with any of these websites. If they're yours, I apologize. And I was you can tell, on a fitness kick when I made these slides. So bear with me. But this is one where I have seen it on very small sites. I've seen it on huge websites. But please stop asking your customers to sign up to your newsletter in the first few seconds they're on your site on their very first visit, which this one definitely is, because I used incognito. I hadn't visited this site prior. There's no previous data, and it often, this one doesn't do it, but often you're offering a discount on top of this. And I urge you to try some other things here to see whether you can get closer to what a customer truly wants when they first visit a website, which is really what we're thinking about here. If you have someone completely new and you've captured them through organic or whatever channel, how do you want to nurture that first visit? Is this what you want them to see the very first time they go to your homepage? I have a feeling the answer is probably no. I have a feeling that there's maybe something else that you want them to do first. You want them to be introduced to your brand. And while getting newsletter signups is critical in this day and age, and I know that it is a priority, when is the most effective time to do that? So how to test it? There's a lot of different variations to this depending on what your priorities on and what I originally said about like what the priorities of the newsletter is and like how you use your newsletter. But really one thing is to test some different timings for this. Test doing it after they've taken some key initiatives on the site, whether you know that people are much more engaged if they look at 3 products first, or if they just, go to a few category pages. You can test a lot of different timings. There could be a lot of different iterations, but a lot of the times what I see is that either the newsletter sign up rate is not affected at all, or it's improved. And if it's not affected and you were offering a 10% discount right away versus a little later, you don't lose a lot there. Or there could also be some opportunities where if you offer this newsletter sign up later and do not offer a discount, or only offer a discount when you know that this is like a key decision point and you may be able to motivate someone to purchase where they could or wouldn't before, then you've technically saved some money there. So it really, looking at those performance metrics, there's a lot that you can play with here. And this is one where looking at that newsletter sign up rate plus, what happens with those coupons if you use them after, if you're continuing to use them, is a really key one to test out, and really an opportunity to think a little bit more almost like a brand marketer in the perspective of what you want a customer to see the very first time they come to your site. All right, and this one is, I know, another topic that everyone's like, well, that's certain Amazon, like they make it so easy for them to do free shipping, but it's so hard for us, which is true. It sucks because, they have their whole shipping and logistics machine and they can offer it and it's not a problem for them, but for us, it can be really hard. But there are certain ways to do this without breaking the bank. And it is something time and again that consumers have made clear that they care about. And it's not always so much about the fact that there's free shipping or not free shipping, although it can be a factor. It's about the prices too. Like what's fair in proportion to the product? What are some options that are available? This is another obviously fitness related example, but I know that some customers, especially when they're looking at purchasing outside of Amazon or something like that, it can be kind of a bummer to look at a product and be like, well, it's not really that expensive of a product, but even with a discount or whatever, there's the shipping is so expensive. So there are some ways to test this without breaking the bank, even for smaller businesses. And this always all comes down to different clever pricing options, and also what is best for the customer and what makes the most sense for the customer based on your cart size. Another one that I've seen that sometimes bums me out is something where an average check for your product is maybe something around $50 and you only offer shipping around $100. There may be some ways that you could have some more tiers in there to make that a little bit more worth it. So the test here that you can try out is calculate how much shipping truly costs you. Set up some pricing tests where you include free shipping always or at a lower threshold. And this is where also an advanced testing tool like SiteSpec really helps, because you can be a lot more careful about how you segment this traffic. Well, because it can be something where if there's price differences, obviously the consumer can be a little frustrated if they see both A and B version. So just keep that in mind. But one of the most simple ways to test free shipping, if you haven't done it, is to actually raise your prices, show free shipping, but the price of the product is actually different. And see if the conversion rate and revenue is higher when the price of your shipping is hidden or not. It might be that it doesn't make a difference, and then you can continue to do it however you want. Maybe that it's worthwhile considering raising the prices of your products to offer free shipping. And that is something that the consumer doesn't necessarily think about when they're looking at it. Like, is this product more expensive to bake in shipping or not? If you don't want to do it purely that way, then another place to really consider how you can delight is offering some additional options for shipping and see what's feasible, or see if there's some additional things that you can do to lower that. Or also, like I said, trying some different tiers that make sense. So maybe offering one thing that can make a lot of sense and your analytics team can support with is, what is the threshold that would actually drive average order value up if we offered free shipping? Which is a really interesting question and another aspect to this test. So what I mean by that is that you can say, all right, our normal average order value is $150. And by the way, if it's $150, you might want to consider the free shipping part. This is where, like, you could also look at profit margins, but say it's $150. And if I offer free shipping for $160 or $170, our customer is actually motivated to add something extra to their cart. And you'll be surprised that sometimes that is the case, which is counterintuitive, because, that you can find that sweet spot, and it might actually be that they'd be spending more than they would on shipping for the original price. But that motivation is there. And that's something where, once you've really nailed some of these other parts, that's a test that you can do to drive some additional incrementality in your revenue. And this is another one which I think is great. SiteSpec's conversion rate optimization consultants recommended this one, but I also think that they're really excellent, and I've seen some of these tests do really well. Is to consider how you can make the shopping cart better. The shopping cart is obviously used in a lot of other ways than the name implies, and consider like what that means in the digital space. So obviously there's typically a pretty high amount of customers that add to cart and do not purchase. I think one part of this is accepting that those people are going to be there, but also, if they're going to be there, they definitely have some purchase intent. So how can you add that value and encourage them to purchase when they're ready? There's a lot of different features I've seen here: an add to wish list, save for later sort of options. This is also an opportunity to get people to sign up for your newsletter or to become an account member. Make quantity selections easier. It's a great place also to consider adding feedback surveys when examining heat mapping. This step in the funnel can be like a great indicator and a great way to like understand if there's a way to make this more convenient for your customers. There's also some good options to consider when it comes to what that shopping cart looks like and how it can be browsed. So do you have a preview or a drop down, like almost a mini cart option or not? Have you tested the difference? Does it make a difference? Do people like it? Do they not? All of these are areas that are really good to explore. And like I said, it can have value beyond just getting someone to purchase. And this is another one that SiteSpec recommended, but I'm also really enjoy. And there's also another one where I have a best practice one where I really, really think that there's some companies who could spend some more time analyzing what they currently have. So the way your menu is laid out, the type, the placement, they're really easy tests to run also, is a thing to consider. By volume, you can test this on the homepage where you have a lot more volume, where some tests like in the checkout and cart are difficult to run unless you're a really high volume business. And even then, sometimes those will take quite some time if you have a low conversion rate. So the data-driven way to do this is to analyze your top categories browsed and purchased in your data. You want to compare those two also. So what is most commonly browsed, what products are most commonly browsed, and what's most commonly purchased? Is there a mismatch there? Is there some category that you have that you don't actually have in the main menu, but has a much higher conversion rate than others? Evaluate any drop-off points in browsing. I think I already mentioned this, but there's oftentimes bouncing between like product detail and product listing pages. Is there any way that you can rephrase your menu to make that easier? Is there something specific that customers are trying to find that isn't easy to find in your menu? And then also looking at heat maps for the current menus for both click-through rates and conversion rates, if your tool has that information, is a really interesting and great starting point. That's a simple test where if you notice that there's a certain menu item that is not the most prominent in the hierarchy that people really like, what happens if you move it? Does that improve conversion rate even further, or does it not? Starting to understand that and get to a place where you feel like you have the best possible menu can be really great. And, I'm going to dive a little bit more in detail because this is a huge area for you to test. But going back to some of the previous examples where there's some things where I say, don't do that, let's try something else, is like, unless you're like a really high-end luxury brand, I generally haven't seen this perform super well, and I would recommend testing it, which is avoiding categorizing only by like a designer collection name, something that's really not specific, because unless your consumer is familiar with this brand, they might not know that. Or another option is if you are a luxury brand, this is a place where personalization can be a great opportunity. So if you can test out reintroducing this when you have people who you think are going to be motivated by this type of categorization. Menu types, when we're talking about like the actual structure, is really interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen like an image grid style menu where you can see pictures for each category. Also, even just like the pure structure of is it an accordion or a hamburger menu or not? Testing these options can help you understand what your customers like most. There's a lot of things out there, and there may be some things that are best practice or not, but really you're trying to get to the bottom of what makes the most sense for your customers specifically. And this final example here, once again, not affiliated with a brand, just like them, but is that there's a lot of different ways you can categorize your products. If you think about it, you can categorize it by product type or material. You could categorize it by, dividing by gender, all sorts of things. And examining what works best for your business is going to be a great idea. There's nothing wrong with that example. It's just a good one. This is another area where, as an analyst, I see a lot of pain points in the data. I can really clearly see that it's frustrating to customers, and I can understand why. Also, a super timely topic right now with supply chain issues that are happening. But this is a recommendation, once again, from SiteSpec's CRO team. But playing around with how you communicate out of stock and live inventory drives a lot of value for the customer. So you really don't want customers to get all the way to entering their payment and then find out that what they want to purchase is out of stock. And this one can be a lot more technically difficult than some of the other examples that I've given, but it's worth considering for you larger brands, whether you're giving this information in a way that makes sense. So testing these in cart and checkout can be a bummer, and then testing it as soon in the funnel as possible can be a big, help. And this is one where you would just carefully analyze, like, is it worth it to implement? So is the uplift that you see, if you do see an uplift, worth it to implement? So it may be that it's like, oh, well, we'll have to use this third-party tool that's really expensive. So you want to weigh the pros and cons, but it can be really like just having an out-of-stock call to action or a waiting list is one way to mitigate that without using an expensive tool. All right, and then this one is also, I think it was a recommendation coming from all sides. Another place to delight your customers is to test payment methods. Definitely think you should test them before implementing them and play around with how they're placed on the checkout page. Which ones do you offer? Are there certain ones that motivate customers to purchase more? Obviously, once again, one for bigger companies, but a current Insightline customer recently introduced Apple Pay and saw millions in revenue in their first weekend, which was great. There was just so much demand for it. And that was one where they decided to do that based on customer feedback first. So they had the data that proved that it was going to be a good idea. And then also, by the way, if you're curious about that customer feedback, a great way to do is ask and check out. So is there a payment method that is missing that you would like to see? And, there may be some options there that you weren't considering before. All right. So, that's great, but that was a ton of testing ideas. If you haven't tried any of these before, how on earth am I going to prioritize them? I can't really end testing without talking about the framework that should be the backbone of how you test. That's how you create true impact with testing programs, is by having a good framework. So there's a lot of different ways to make this matrix look, but this is the basic idea, is that if you aren't evaluating your tests with at least some sort of scoring system or a matrix, oh my God, please start right now, because it's going to make a huge difference for the satisfaction of your whole testing team and who's involved, and also the impact of your program. It makes it a lot less of an ego thing and a lot less of a dramatic thing to say, hey, when we put your test on this matrix, we're not going to test it because it would be a lot of work and we don't think it would make a big impact. There's no arguments to that, especially if you have some sort of ranking system that goes beyond this, that adds points. We've designed several of these programs before, or these matrices that match the business, but really it can be as simple as this, and it can be a little more complicated. But pretty much what you have is, on one side, you have the impact based on return on investment and revenue. And on the other side, you have the effort, which is how much development time. If this is something where we're going to have to hack together a feature and feature flag it and everything before we can do it, that's a lot of effort. If it's something that can be changed in more of a WYSIWYG style, that's very little effort. And then on the ROI and revenue side, there's a few different ways that we can evaluate that, but doing some simple math is the easiest way. So say you're going to evaluate something in cart. Okay, if we assume that it's going to have a 5% uplift on final conversion rate and our average order value is X, how much more revenue is going to be that per month? And then you can put that next to something else and say, all right, this thing would be $5 million a month, and this thing would be $300,000 a month. It's going to be clear what the scale is for you and like what the opportunity is. So I've put some of these on here. Obviously, it would depend a little bit on the business where they would all live. But like I said before, things like the menu variations, except for some of the ones like maybe the picture menu, that one might end up somewhere else because it would require some more development time. And like newsletter sign up, they're all typically higher impact and they're low investment. Once again, depends a bit on your site and how complicated it is to change some of these things. Some sites it's very easy. But that area is the low-hanging fruit. There might not be a lot of tests that end up there, but if they do fall in there, you should definitely prioritize them. And then there's the high-impact major projects area, which is things where you're quite sure based on the math that it's going to make a big impact for your customers, and it's going to drive more revenue. But it's also going to take a lot of investment to make that happen. You're going to have to introduce a third-party partner to test, or you have to design a prototype. There's, and so there'll be a test that will end up here, and you will want to then look at your list and have only a few of these running at a time. That's appropriate to your capacity. I'm a really big fan of agile methodologies, and I think that running testing programs that way makes a lot of sense. So if you add, based on your understanding of like the capacity of your testing team, we can test this many things or this many points. That can make a really good way to like have maybe one high impact major project per sprint or whatever time period, and then fill in with some of these other pieces. Lower impact, low investment are things where you're not really sure if it's going to make a huge difference, but it's also pretty easy to do. I've put menu variations there again, just because it could end up there as well. It might not make a major impact, but it also may. And the same thing with like micro copy, call to action messaging, anything like that. You want to make sure that you're filling up your pipeline with enough things that you're getting learnings. And then if anything ever ends up into that, like, oh, this is just going to be a ton of work and we think it's going to be low impact, like make sure that you're throwing out some tests. All right, and I'm going to go to Q&A now, but I'm going to leave it on this slide for just a second. I see that there's at least one question, so I want to make sure that I answer that, but I'll talk a little bit more about us. So we design testing programs and strategy. We're a agile consulting firm, and we also do insights delivery, business intelligence support, data strategy, and survey design. So that's what we do. So all of these elements of what we touched on before are things that we support with and are very much on that level of like making stuff happen, making business impact happen, versus an agency that just delivers implementation. Perfect. Well, I will reshare this, I promise. But you can scan the screen to go to our website. Otherwise, the website is insightlineanalytics.com, relatively straightforward, and it should also be on any other materials. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can look at your questions without having everyone see them. Ooh, this is a good one. Okay. So what's the most common analytics challenge you see with or without testing? It's hard to pick just one, but I would say that getting people to actually use the data that they have, so action insights, is the hardest thing. A lot of us gather way more data than you could possibly imagine. And the amount of that actually gets used to drive business decisions is minuscule. Even in the most advanced companies, they're still only actioning a small fraction of the data that they're using. And that is just like, it's a challenge on so many levels. It's hard because it's a certain skill set to translate what insights there are to senior leadership. And it's also a skill set of senior leadership to understand and interface with analytics teams. It's also hard just because there's a huge demand for analytics resources in the industry right now, even more than ever. And there's usually not enough analysts proportional to the demand. So there's that part. And then also just these methodologies of like how to really leverage and how to bring up the things that make the most difference isn't a skill set in an entry-level analyst. And so sometimes companies are missing that like polish in their organization because they have more junior analysts or people who don't have that like business context on top of an analytics background. And it is a really common challenge. I would say almost every company has it. I think that sometimes we get caught up in some other conversations like data quality, and that's almost never the issue. So really, I would say that's a great question. And also it is, something that keeps me up at night, but I'm also inspired by it. Okay, there's more questions. All right. Do you test design before it gets to development? If so, what type of tests, tools, or vendors do you use? I'm going to answer this as best as I can. I'm interpreting what you mean by design for both user experience and creatives. And so I'll answer it for both is what I'll do because we have time. So yes, I think it's very useful to test say the design of a new feature before it gets to development. It can be tricky to do this without at least a little bit of development work, but it kind of depends on what kind of lift you want to do. There's a few different options. I know that SiteSpec could probably speak to how they could do it, which is that they could kind of do a swap or a prototype type design that you could test without actually having the full functionality on there. There's some tricky ways that you can do that where, say you want to test a new feature and you can kind of like make it seem like that feature is working, but instead you redirect to another page. That's a clever way to do that from the other side. And so that, I use the testing tool, but there's also some other ways that you can do something like that, which is designing subsites that you redirect to that have that design look. So you almost have kind of, and like with SiteSpec, it's really easy to make that happen without it looking like there's a redirect happening. So there's some clever ways to do that. And it's more about like, how much resource do we need? Do we need any development to do it? Is there some way that we can kind of hack together something as like a, iterate fast, fail fast sort of approach? And then from a creative's perspective, I'm also just saying this mostly because I want to say it. There's ways to pre-test creatives. It's a bit mathematics and it's a bit using consumer insights. And I don't have any particular tools I use for that, but it's pretty specific to the company and what they like to do. But it's also a way that you can kind of predict the success of a creative before you end up putting it into production. And I don't know, I wasn't super specific about the types of tests, but like one thing you can do is like, if you wanted to do a whole site redesign or maybe a certain page redesign, there could be ways, especially on website, this is a lot easier, but could be ways that you could have a designer mock that up, and not have so much development hands-on, and test it at that first stage, validate, make sure it seems like something that has some traction, and then, continue to do iterations. All right, here's another one. So you mentioned skill set. What types of skills do you need or should we look for in hiring to be successful? Another super great question. And I think I touched on it a little bit, but like if you don't have somebody who is that translator between teams, that's one thing to look for. And if you can't find someone who does that, because like I said, it's, there's only a certain amount of people who have 10 years of experience in this industry and have cross-industry experience with marketing or product or something like that, look for the mindset that's behind it, which is someone who can go in and understand where different departments are coming from and be that linker and be collaborative. And so it's really leadership skills or like soft skills. You want to have some analysts that have soft skills. Other skill sets, like I'm also a huge fan of when you're looking for like more entry level analysts, it doesn't matter if they have 3 years of experience in Google Analytics. If they have an analytical mindset and are a good problem solver, you can teach them Google Analytics or you can teach them Adobe Analytics, and they're going to learn. And as long as they're an eager person, I talk about this a lot, but like something about Insight Lime and how we like pick our consultants is we look for people with soft skills, and we develop the soft skills a lot, like just as much as we do the hard skills. So I would look for those things. So like whatever aligns with your business culture, but also things like that drive and that curiosity. And really the other part that I would look for, which I know is super broad, and you're like, well, I just wanted you to tell me you need 3 years of experience in site spec or whatever, but is like somebody who can get a project done or has that drive to keep asking and following up and doing all those things, even when other people are not as engaged. Okay, we have 2 minutes, so please put more questions if you have them, but there is one more. So what types of clients do you work with or see as a good fit for Insight Lime? It's a good question. Industry-wise, we work in a few broad areas. So we're very focused on e-commerce. In there, we do have some subsets, like we have worked with quite a few luxury vegan brands and food and beverage. And that also expands to the QSR industry. We have some QSR clients, and you can see some of them on the logo wall. And then the other area we do is actually SaaS products, usually B2B. So like we have some fintech clients and things like that where for them, we serve them in more of that consumer insights capacity and do a lot of like feature prioritization surveys and things like that. And then as far as like the type of client, what we really look for is someone who's just like super eager to do this. If you're like me, I'm just doing this because like, I don't know, the board said we should, or that's usually not the type of client that sees success with us. We really like people that are just like super eager to be in there, and it doesn't matter if they're not that mature. So as long as they're like ready to learn, and we do come into some companies that have very little analytics support, even though they're really big, and we can support them in like visioning how that's going to look in the future. And our goal, I say, is always to try and get replaced. So we're always really happy when a client finally outgrows us and says, all right, we have our own team, we're ready to run. But then also we do have some like more advanced clients who have a team, but they just want, some additional people to support in like some specific area.
Wow, those are some great questions. We are approaching our stop time. Thank you, MaryBeth, for chatting with us today. Hopefully everyone that attended got some great information and some good inspiration for testing. We thank you all for attending today's webinar. For more information on SiteSpect or Insight Lime Analytics, we do encourage you to visit those websites. This concludes our webinar. Thanks again and have a great day, everyone.